Well, I'm ready this time. My phone overheated, then it fell to the ground, and so there went my video. So I'm going to try this again. Try to do it quicker this time. And I want to mention, as I'd mentioned, racism is a billion-dollar business. So you have to look behind what's behind this July 1st protest about every child matters. And that is that someone's pushing this event just like Black Lives Matter pushed last year. So somebody's winning here. So let's take you back. As I'd mentioned in the video that I tried to make, preachers are putting on these sermons and they're getting arrested, fined, imprisoned, and that's wrong. It is really wrong. And how do you defeat this? Well, you have to look at the bigger picture of who's pulling the strings. And for Justin Trudeau, for example, the idea is, well, let's use residential schools against churches. That sounds like a good plan. But there are people like me who will call you out and know that this is happening. So this whole thing with these residential schools, it's about money and racism. So the Cowess's chief had said that it's not a mass grave. These are unmarked graves. And the BC chief had said that they knew about these graves. Of course they knew about these graves. Because people don't forget certain things, but most of the public, they're ignorant to the facts. They don't pay attention. Of course they didn't know. They didn't know until the media opened their mouth and said something, but the fact is they knew about these graves. And I want to mention, again, quickly, that they weren't going to ship the bodies back, the kids that died, because they weren't going to affect the community. The government was too cheap. They were never going to ship an Indian back to the reserve to be buried. And these graves were unkept. But so now I want to challenge people on this so-called double standard. It is a double standard. Because for thousands of years, Indians have been burying their people. Where are their markers? Where are these markers? Why are these markers all of a sudden important? Is it because a white person buried them? That's why. And this white guilt that they know they can use and squeeze more money out of the government, which is basically the taxpayer, and that's you. You're allowing this to continue by just continuing to feel guilty about something you didn't do. Now, I'm not saying that there weren't people who did something wrong, because if you did something wrong and you abused these kids in residential school, you deserve to go to jail. Not just jail. Maybe you should be left in there to open population for them to deal with you. But that's another topic. And I want to mention that they talk so like residential schools were the only thing, an evil thing that was going on. And as I mentioned, and I'm going to say it again, public school in small town where I grew up wasn't so great neither. I used to get the strap. I used to get the damn yardstick. I used to get beat with it. Not just me, I seen it happen to others. Had a racist bus driver who would squeeze your leg until, the bleeding, bruising. He would make you ride on the damn steps at 50 miles per hour with the door open. People know about this. He'd boot you off 1-2 miles from home. So this isn't about me. This is about me simply saying, everybody's life isn't easy, but I'm not going to hold shit over people that didn't do anything wrong. Enough of the sob stories, because the reality is, I mentioned about education on these reserves are a failure. When you hear the chiefs and the teachers and the profs, they keep saying that, these children are abused. They've they're malnourished. The reality, you'll never make anything of yourself because the evil white man and the government are set up against you. I got news for you. The government isn't there to help anybody except these rich people, these billionaires that pull their strings and that own them. And it is just disgusting from what I've seen Trudeau go and putting his knee on the grave. There's, you know, a sociopath, if anything. So, these graves. What makes these ones so special to these First Nations chiefs, these race hustlers, these professors, right? Billion-dollar industry, remember that. The more we can squeeze you, the more guilt we can get out of you, the more money we can get. Not for their people, but for their own pockets. Because we know how corrupt reserves are. There's good chiefs. They help their people. They do. You can see how well their people are doing by just looking at the housing, the jobs available, the smiles on their faces. They don't have to live in poverty and excuses of that welfare check that their chief is so proudly at handing them. Now, I hurt some feelings about the education on reserves. Well, it's not that great. It isn't. When you leave there, if you graduate with a grade 12, it's really a grade 9. They push you into school, but here's the problem. Getting into college and universities with that white guilt now, they had to increase the spots for Indigenous people who weren't qualified to get in, so we lower the standard. Just like jobs. Lower the standard for them. They get in. Now we can't give them the entire curriculum that we would give, say, to an Asian student or a white student. We have to lessen it because they can't handle it. We got to water it down. And they do so bad on that they have to curve the grade and move it over so that they can claim success. And then you send these teachers back out into the community. That's just an abuse. You're failing your community. And thanks to the chief and to these white guilt institutions, this affirmative action, this employment equity, or, as I had mentioned, preferential treatment. And I told you what preferential treatment is these people who get preferential treatment, when they get equal treatment to them, it seems like discrimination all of a sudden, because they can't handle having to compete on the same level as anybody else. How does it feel? Tokenism. That doesn't solve anything. So you appoint some woman to the Governor General. Tokenism. The position means nothing, because in reality, Justin Trudeau still controls it. The Prime Minister, it doesn't matter who that Prime Minister is. So back to these so-called graves. Why is it the Indigenous people have been burying their people in unmarked graves for centuries, prior to the European contact? All over this country, we call them sacred burial grounds. Well, here's the issue I have, is because why aren't they marked? Why all of a sudden, because white people are burying an Indigenous person, it has to have something there for life? It's a double standard. And remember, squeezing that white guilt again. It puts no responsibility on the Indigenous people. But you got to go back a couple years as to when Justin Trudeau, you know, he said the government was creating or responsible for genocide upon Indigenous people. Well, that took the moral authority away from government and gave it to Indigenous people. The moral authority. And so now Indigenous people hear this and these leaders and they say, wow, that's good. We can use the race card now. The white guilt. They have to prove that they're not racist. I say straighten your back. Because if you're white and you didn't do anything wrong to these people, you have nothing to feel guilty about. Because these people who are standing with these Indigenous people right now, those people are using you. You're like a pawn. That's what you are. You are a pawn to them. There's a bigger game going on here. And people need to realize that bigger game that is going on. I'm not trying to bash Indigenous people. I'm only pointing out the crooks at the top who are involved in this. and this scam of this every child matters, because if every child mattered, why is it only Indigenous focused? Every child matters, not just Indigenous ones. I have so many great Indigenous friends who work their ass off to get where they are. They're proud. They support their families. They don't owe nothing to their chief, their band, or any other Native institution. They did it on their own. That's because they accepted personal responsibility, and they knew that the only thing that they could get out of the reserve was poor me and a welfare check. Now, if you want to continue on with this welfare check, go ahead. But personal responsibility is the way. When Harper, the same thing, when he apologized, what you have done is you have given away the moral authority to even say anything anymore. That now you, as I said, they're using the double negative on you. You have to prove that you're not racist. And the only way you can prove that you're not racist is to give them more money or give them spots in jobs that they don't earn. Such as, oh, if you don't have 10 jobs on your firm, you're a racist firm. Well, we gotta now, okay, we gotta employ 10 Indigenous people, even if they're not qualified. We gotta give them tokenism. Tokenism doesn't solve anything. Let Indigenous people compete. Please, let Indigenous people compete. Do not give them tokenism. It is insulting to give something to somebody that they have not earned. It's a stigma attached for the rest of their life. They know that they have never earned the position or the degree that they got. So, I don't know. I know that I'm not that happy. Because as this continues, we're losing this country, because we're losing it to racism, the lie, the white guilt. You're going to step aside for about 10 seconds because someone's coming by here. I just got to make sure that my dogs don't get run over here. Okay, so getting back into this. Please let Indigenous people earn their spots. They don't need freebies. They don't need you doing them favors. You're doing them more harm than good. Just like the chiefs. Just like the media. What we have here today is we have all these Indigenous people being lied to consistently, lied to, misled by the media and their leaders and the professors, the liberal professors and the poorly educated, that Indigenous people are still victims. No, they're not victims of the government or white people anymore. They are victims of their own leadership. Indigenous people, you can be anything you want. Nobody stands in your way. Nobody. Except yourself. And as I'd mentioned, take a look at the schools, and you're going to find out most Indigenous people, their teaching areas is never calculus, math, right? Physics, chemistry. They're always avoiding this. They take the easy route of Indigenous studies or history. They never really help their Indigenous people understand things like economics is the way to prosperity. I love economics. I understand economics. That's why I speak out. I mean, I'm told of my own chief who talks about economics is the way of the future, not welfare checks. But our so-called leaders in the media says that they were chanting, there's no pride in genocide. I put forward there's no pride in a welfare check neither. There isn't. But I want to talk to you about genocide now. They're saying white people or the government is committing genocide upon them. Well, let's go back to pre-contact and early contact. Let's talk about the one group. There's more than one, but let's talk about the Mohawks. Of how after a war or a battle, they would capture another group. And what they would do is if you weren't killed, you were made a slave. If you were a slave and you survived, okay, but they would torture you. And the ones that they kept alive, they would actually assimilate them. So they would wash their pate, cut their hair, remove their clothes, and give them a new name. Sounds like assimilation and genocide of individuals to me. But this isn't history of what they always cover up. It's always the victim mentality. And this goes on, it doesn't matter where. It's the same thing with Black Lives Matter, using excuses. Personal responsibility. It is not your responsibility to look after them anymore. Mr. Wasis had said, have you anything better to offer our people to the other chiefs like Badger? And all that these other chiefs could offer was either war or starvation. He's seen the future coming forward, that if you stand still, you disappear because time moves forward without you and your people. Times were never easy. And there's another man. He'd said leadership is about submission to duty, not elevation to power. Gordon Tatussis. So, with all these so-called chiefs and these professors, all these people that have any kind of power, they're leading us to nowhere, Indigenous people. Quit thinking yourself as a collective. You are an individual. Individual identity is more important. For some reason, if one Indigenous person does well in a community, the rest of the community, for some reason, hates them. For some reason, they want everybody to be poor. Well, that individual, he or she got off their ass and left because there's nothing on the reserve for them. They looked because they wanted the future for themselves and their children. And a reserve doesn't offer that. Personal responsibility. I'm going to say that again. Have respect for yourself. There is no respect and dignity in taking a welfare check. Yes, our elders need to be looked after. I am in 100% support of that. Or the people that can't care for themselves who are disabled. I get that. But I do not get handing a welfare check to the able-bodied individuals. The chiefs and the Indigenous people that hate me, let me tell you who they are. They're the guy, the crack dealer selling crack on the corner, and they say, hey, brother, or the sister selling herself in prostitution. Because they go to jail and they get their little hierarchy in their little group. They'd rather be within a group than to have their own personal identity. Those kind of individuals are not good role models. You should be staying the hell away from people like that. Think about yourself for a change. So this whole idea of when these churches are being burnt down, it's not the good Indigenous people, they're criminals. And these criminals need to go to jail. Period. Same with the people out there speaking out saying burn it down or it's understandable. They need to go to jail too. So I understand, I made the choice many years ago that I would never work for an Indigenous organization because I knew what they stood for. And the reason why I speak so out about these schools that are for Indigenous people and special programs, because I knew the scam. Because I myself, I know what it was like to take courses with them. Because in mainstream, where I competed with everybody, I was getting 70s to 80s. But when I went into an Indigenous focused course, I was all of a sudden getting 90s and I didn't even have to try. They would lower the standard. And that helped nobody. Didn't help me, it just made me realize the failure in the system. Economics is the way. Take personal responsibility for yourself. Enough with the white guilt, okay? They keep using that. It's called the race card. You can hate me if you want, but I don't care. I don't care if I hurt your feelings. As I said, I don't need your vote. That's the politicians who need your vote. I don't need it. I'm just going to keep talking and pointing out what I see and what the facts are, because facts don't care about your feelings. Remember that. We have a generation right now of where what they're learning in school is that racism is keeping them back. And the so-called leaders keep telling their kids that they'll never get anywhere because of the evil white man. You're destroying your own kids' future. The image of possibilities that they have by saying that and by lowering the standards for them. Let me tell you something about an individual who never needed that. Carey Price. Carey Price wasn't handed to him. In order to become the goaltender he was shooting for excellence, not affirmative action. He didn't need some tokenism of saying, well, we need to have 20% of the NHL being indigenous, so let's water it down and feel sorry for them. You earn your spots. You earn what you get. Remember that. So I'm not bad-mouthing indigenous people. I'm bad-mouthing the piss-poor leadership that we have been stuck with for indigenous people, the race hustlers, the ones that only seek the money and that want to hurt indigenous people and use the pain that the individuals have to only squeeze for more money. So when you get one of these race hustlers coming out, call them out for what they are. They're a race hustler. So I think I've said enough right here. I can't remember some of the more stuff, but I've been on here long enough. But don't let them get away with calling you racist anymore. If you haven't done anything wrong, you got nothing to worry about. Nothing. Be who you are. Look after your own family. Look after your mother, your father. Help. Be a good member in your community, you know. But handing people money on the street corner keeps them there. What's that saying in the Bible of something like about give a man a fish he eats for a day, teach him to fish, he'll eat for life? I mean, the indigenous people of the past would laugh at the current people today who are dependent on the government for that welfare check. They would call them the dances with dependency people. That's an insult, because the indigenous people of the past survived by themselves with each other. They were never dependent on being given stuff. And some little, oh, poor me, they're going to say that, oh, the government put us there. You know what? You had the option to leave. My father had the choice to go into residential school or go to work. Well, actually didn't have the choice to go to work. He ran away and said, I'm going to work, and he was only in grade 8. He said he wasn't going to be a part of that. He chose to work rather than taking the easy way out. So that's what I learned. Work for a living. I have failed more than I have succeeded. Of all the jobs that I applied for, I never got them. I got jobs. Yes, I did. And I was glad, but I didn't. When you deal with failure, that's how you succeed. But if you're going to sit there and wallow and blame somebody else all the time, that's not the place to be. So be proud of who you are. Be proud of where you live. Because on Canada Day, I did see some immigrants wearing the Canadian colors, seeing how proud they were stepping into this country and leaving the oppressive or the poverty that they were at because of the prosperity and the freedom that this country delivers. If you want to live in the past, you're the problem. Because as I'd said, when they negotiated the treaties, they did not say, welfare check for life, boys and girls. They said, in case of famine or hard times. Same thing in those treaties. It does not say give you a PhD, money for the PhD. It says education, meaning the same thing everybody else gets is a grade 12. I got so many other topics on this related, you know, including segregation BS. But enough right now. I think I've angered enough people. I know I've hurt some people, but tough luck. Facts don't care about your feelings. Have a nice day, Canada.